A woman arrives at the gates of heaven. Of course, who does she meet? Always at the gates of heaven seems to be St. Peter, who's there to greet her. She looks into the gates of heaven through the bars, and she sees a long banquet table, and her family is celebrating, and they're saying, come in, and she's excited. She says to St. Peter, how do I get into the gates, through the gates of heaven? He says, it's easy. Just spell one word. What word would that be? Says the woman. The word is love. L-O-V-E. And she's in. A year goes by, and St. Peter has to go on a vacation. He needs a vacation too, and he goes on vacation. But he asks the woman, would you mind standing guard at the gates of heaven? It's an important job, and you know what to do. So all day long, she's there, and she's giving people words, and they're getting on in. And then her husband shows up. Maury? Is it you? Really, you? Maury? It is me. What are you doing here? Oh, it's a long story. Let me tell you what I've been doing for the last year, says Maury. Remember that beautiful nurse that was at your side when you were dying? We got married. We had passionate relationship. We went, remember that dream house we always wanted? We bought it. I finally quit my job, and we traveled the world together. Oh, is that so, says the woman. And here I am. I was on a scuba diving accident this morning, and poof, I died. How, by the way, do I get into the gates of heaven? Oh, she said, it's very easy. You just have to spell one word. Maury says, what word would that be? And the woman says, Czechoslovakia. 2 weeks ago, I spoke about parenting. Last week, relationships in general. Today, the specific relationship of marriage, right? Matrimony, holy matrimony, till Czechoslovakia do us part. It's complicated. Marriage, anybody who is married or has been married knows just how beautiful and wonderful and holy it can be and how challenging it could be. Of course, not my marriage, because my wife's staring at me in the back, but all of yours and marriage since the beginning of time. The truth of the matter is, marriage is really under assault for the first time, I think, in modern history. It's on the decline. I don't know if you know this, but statistically, every year there's less and less weddings in the United States of America. In the year 2000, there were 2.3 million marriages. And in the year 2010, there were 2.1 million marriages. To make matters worse, the general population is increasing, so it's a double whammy, right? On top of which, we all know the famous statistic: for every 2 marriages, 1 ends up in divorce. It is not an easy thing to do, to be married. It's something that's incredibly important in our society, in our religion, in our communities. We have to really talk about and have the conversation about what does it mean to be married? What is the institution of marriage all about? It isn't to say everybody has to get married to live a good, meaningful life. It isn't. It isn't to say that that's the only way to bring kids into this world. I know plenty of good people who are single parents and brought children into this world as single parents. It isn't to say that divorce is wrong. In Judaism, there is a time and a place for divorce. It's not only acceptable in Judaism, it is a mitzvah. It is a commandment. Under the right circumstances and for the right, or I guess wrong, individuals to get divorced. But that is also not to say that we don't have ideals. We have ideals. And I believe we need to be bold about our ideals and not be ashamed to have ideals, something to strive towards. We're living in a world where it's not always politically correct or acceptable to have ideals or hold up ideals, and I think it's important to say marriage is an ideal, right? The challenge with marriage today, many challenges, one of the challenges is oftentimes we're over idealistic. And there's a difference between having an ideal, something to strive towards, and idealistic. If you look up the word idealistic in the dictionary, all kinds of words like lofty and grandiose, grand, surround it. Because idealistic isn't necessarily a good thing. Whereas ideal is a bar you could strive towards, idealistic is oftentimes more of a fantasy that you can never get to no matter how hard you try. And I hear idealistic language around marriage and soulmates and love with young people today. I feel like an Altakaker, right? I've been married 14 years. Let me tell you something. I know many of you have been married much longer, and you can tell me a thing or two about marriage. But when I counsel young people who are getting married, I tell them a thing or two about the challenges of their notion of soulmate And it's something that's doing great damage, I believe, to the institution of marriage. It's actually not a new phenomenon. In the Torah itself, the very first marriage, the very first relationship was overly idealistic. Adam and Eve. You look at these two individuals, and all I see is fantasy. Remember the story, Adam is alone in the Garden of Eden. It is more than alone. The text says he's livado. He's lonely. So what does God say? Lo tov, vayom Adonai Elohim, lo tov heot adam levado aseh lo ezer kenegdo. It is not good to be lonely. It's fine to be alone. It's not good to be lonely. So what does God do? God says to Adam, it's time to find your soulmate. First, Adam takes matters into his own hands. And he goes looking for love in all the wrong places. And he goes looking for it in animals. Nothing wrong with finding love in animals, right? Some of our good friends, our pets are meaningful to us and speak to our heart. My wife is nodding, Jill is nodding, Alana's definitely nodding. I don't want to say anything about anybody's pets, but they will never be beshert. I know I'm going to get in trouble for this later. They can never be a soulmate from a Jewish mystical perspective. Only another human being, right, a life partner, can ultimately fulfill that particular role. So Adam doesn't find it in the cows and the dogs and the animals of the garden. What does God do? God becomes the first matchmaker in history. The Midrash, the rabbinic tales, say God brings to Adam Eve in a marriage kind of a setting. And they stand under the chuppah together. It isn't that she was just taken from his rib, but there's this pomp and this circumstance. And all of a sudden, this caveman, I remember, he was naming the animals. I, Adam, you cow. I, Adam, you pig. And all of a sudden, this monosyllabic caveman becomes a poet. And he sees Eve and its passion and its romance and its fireworks. And he says, this one now is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. And then what does the text say? That a man shall leave his father and mother and cling to his wife, and they become one flesh. And it is such a beautiful and romantic scene. It's like something from one of the Twilight series, right? But the problem is, it seems like it's from the Twilight series. It seems a little bit juvenile, a little bit lovey-dovey, a little bit starry-eyed. And in fact, that's what it is. Because the moment Adam and Eve hit a road bump, the whole thing falls apart. They went from soulmates to playmates to having a falling out over a snake, right? The snake, much deeper than just a walking, talking reptile. The snake is what happens when nachash, when doubt, when uncertainty, when challenge, when obstacles enter our path. And what do? They turn on each other. They blame each other. They run away from God. The whole soulmate love affair falls apart. And then we get into this week's Torah portion. Then we see a real marriage in Abraham and in Sarah. Abraham and Sarah, very different story than Adam and Eve. Remember, Abraham and Sarah actually began last week. At the very end of the Torah portion, Noah, we learn about Abraham and Sarah that they had a tough start. Abraham loses his brother, Abraham loses his father, and it says that Sarai was barren, she could have no children, quote unquote, that there was something deeply absent and missing from their lives, that a lot of things were absent and missing from their lives, that from the very outset, this was a couple that hit obstacle after obstacle after obstacle. And we meet them in this week's Torah portion. And they set off, Lekh Lekha, me'artzecha, me'mulerecha, me'beit avicha el ha'aretz asher arecha. Go forth on a journey. And we think that this is some easy journey. Sarah and Abraham make a journey from yet one more obstacle of they get to the land of Israel and it's a drought, to another obstacle. They go down to the land of Mitzrayim, of Egypt, and Avimelech almost takes Sarah and almost rapes her. It's almost a tragic story. In the end, it turns out well. The rabbis say that they face 10 obstacles, 10 challenges, 10 trials, but they face them together. And they don't fall apart through the obstacles. Some they do, but they always pick themselves up and start over again and again and again. And this is what marriage is all about. Believe me, they had romance and they had passion. They were 90 years old and they were still making kids, right? This is an example of what it means to be passionate and romantic and have that quality in our marriages and in our lives. But it's not the only quality of a marriage. It's not even the essential ingredient to make a good marriage. In Hebrew, we have a couple terms for marriage. One is kiddushim. One is holy matrimony. And it is those peak moments and the simchas, the joyous moments, and the ecstasy and the romance and the passion and the love. But the other word for marriage is nisuin. Nisuin comes from the Hebrew linaseh, which means to carry. Right? To carry. That's what it means to be with a soulmate. To carry the other person when they sometimes can't go on. To carry one another up the mountains of life and through the valleys, the good times, the bad times, even when the romance and the passion isn't there. Teacher of mine, Dennis Prager, says, isn't it ironic that that which is inspired by passion, children, ultimately squashes it? Right? There are times when there is passion and there is times when there is none. To be a soulmate, a beshert, is to stand with our partner in the good times and in the bad. God says, I will make for you, Adam, an ezer, somebody to have fun with, a playmate to enjoy life with, but also konegdo, somebody who's going to push you and prod you and challenge you and give you a good kick in the tuchus when every now and again. That's what a soulmate is. It isn't a playmate, and it's time to face and confront this modern notion of silly soulmate love. Soulmate is the deepest thing we can have in this lifetime. Ultimately, a soulmate is somebody who stands by us and brings us through the darkness of life, through the hopelessness of life, light and hope. And I think of the words of the Beatles song, Here Comes the Sun, right? Getting ready for the next simcha, which I'll share with you in a moment. The words of the Beatles, which were shared to me by somebody I'll introduce. Little darling, it's been a long, cold, lonely winter. Little darling, it feels like years since we've been here. Little darling, the smiles returning to the faces. Little darling, seems like years since it's been here. Little darling, I feel that the ice is slowly melting. Little darling, it seems like years since it's been clear. But what does it mean to be a soulmate? What does it mean to be in a marriage? It means to turn to that other person during the dark times and say, here comes the sun. Here comes the sun, and I say, it's all right, it's all right. That's what it means to be a soulmate. That's what it means to be married, and that's why I'm excited to invite Jason and Rachel to come forward, because last night, Jason and Rachel sealed the deal. They came together, they proposed, and they are headed to the wedding canopy, the chuppah, right, in this holy marriage, matrimony. And anybody who knows Jason and Rachel knows that this is a young man and a young woman who are really deep souls as individuals, who are deeply committed to Yiddishkeit, Judaism. They're here week in and week out. They're deeply committed to their families, who were thrilled. Some of the family is here. Some of the family is online joining us. I know Rachel's mom is joining us right now online with sister as well. And so they're both committed to community and to family, and anybody who knows them knows that they're committed to one another, that they are committed obviously through the good times, but they've already proven that they are committed through the challenging times as well, and they are committed to carrying one another to the wedding canopy, to the chuppah, and far, far beyond. And so with that, I'll say the Birkat Kohanim, the first time we'll say it, hopefully many times for this beautiful holy couple. Yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'yichunecha, Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. And now that they have found each other, the mystics tell us that there is more light in the world that has shattered the darkness, and there is only yet more light to come. Here comes the sun. Here comes the sun. It's all right.